It's always in the news. Cybercriminals attacking great organizations, wreaking havoc on the trust of their brand.
We socialize cybersecurity for you to raise awareness.
Interviewing leaders who built and protect great brands.
We help talented people enter into this incredible field, and we share our research of blockbuster true cybercrime stories.
This is Cybercrime Junkies. And now the show. Well, good day, everybody. I am David Morrow, your host of Cybercrime Junkies. Welcome to the show. We are joined today by two esteemed people in the cybersecurity and national security group. The help that they've been driving is instrumental. We really want to get the word out. Carlo Breda, who is the founder of the Totoro Institute, the Silicon Valley think tank that we talk about often. He's joined us today. Welcome, Carlo.
Thank you very much, David. Very glad to be back on your show.
Always great to see you, sir. And today we have a very special guest, Michael Thiesmeyer, who's an experienced CISO, member of the Forbes Technology Council, executive director of the U.S. National AI and Cybersecurity ISAO. And we're going to get into that as well. And he also is a member of the Silicon Valley think tank along with us. Michael, welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
No, we really appreciate it. So let's get into the ISAO and how it originated. Carlo, would you like to kind of explain some of the context?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. As you guys know, we founded a few years ago this think tank based out of San Francisco with the goal of developing and refining partnerships in the world of cybersecurity and AI and cloud in general. And really, we wanted to model something that was not too dissimilar to the World Economic Forum as a gathering of leaders and from private and public sector to come together and drive forward strategies that would actually make our world a better place, a safer place. And so on occasion, generally on a quarterly basis, our think tank comes up with summits. And these summits, during the pandemic anyway, we've been running them on a virtual basis. And during one of these summits that had AI as a focus, a number of members and delegates came up with the concept of, you know what, there's an area there that really needs to be developed further, and that's kind of the crossover between cybersecurity and AI. The importance of delving into that better, into sharing best practices around AI and cybersecurity, protecting assets, AI assets from a cybersecurity perspective, and using AI to develop better cybersecurity. And all of that is a very, very exciting, hot area at the moment that really needs further exploration. So at the Institute, we created a task force. And Michael Thiesmeyer was actually the person that instigated it and was elected leader of the task force looking at this particular area. And this task force eventually evolved into this concept because the members of the task force came up with the idea of really thinking of creating an ISAO, an information sharing an analysis organization, as opposed to an ISAC, because an ISAC is, of course, looking at the verticals, whereas an ISAO is looking really horizontally at this whole area. Now, and I'm really, really very, 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 very humbled and proud to have Michael Thiesmeyer in this role as an executive director of this ISAO. Michael has a most incredible background in strategy around cybersecurity, cyber defense, counterterrorism, and he's of course very active with NATO and has been representing the ISAO over at NATO on a regular basis at a number of NATO conferences, and spent some time out in the Baltics, also because of that mission. And yeah, so that's really that's kind of the whole thing came about. Of course, with the fact that yesterday the national cybersecurity strategy came out, and it alludes to outreach, partnering between allies, cyber diplomacy, to such an extent that I thought, well, this really fits in so well with the mission of the ISAO. And I thought that today's episode with Michael would be really, really fascinating and exciting for your listeners.
I would agree. I think, and especially in light of yesterday, and think of the momentum that has been gained with the launch of ChatGPT in the fall, how fast that's been adopted. Mostly for good, but there's also bad actors, threat actors leveraging it, and it's really, really impactful. And then with yesterday's report, we have the report. We can go through elements of it as relevant. I've read through the whole thing. I like the pillars, the four main pillars. I think it's excellent. So, Michael, can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen first a little bit about yourself and your background, please, and then let's get into what is an ISAO and what is this ISAO mission?
Of course, gladly. So, like Carlo already said, I have, I would say, about 20 years in technology in general. I've served before the ISAO. I served on various working groups and committees. I was representing ISACA, which is one of the largest industry associations for cybersecurity. And then I was serving on the U.S. national delegation to the International Standards Organization. I served on UN working groups, like Carlos said, was involved with some of the conferences and working groups of NATO, IEEE, like a lot of different organizations, just because I am really passionate about technology, so to say, right? And with that passion and my prior military background comes, I want to make sure that we safely introduce technology into our societies to the betterment for all of us, right? Equal access and all the good stuff. And so that's where I'm coming from. I have worked for PlayStation. I've worked in Silicon Valley for a long while. I was a part of the PS4 launch, so there's a lot of background there, but doesn't necessarily pertain to this today's conversation. And as Carlo alluded to, like we said, we had a summit, and during the summit, we kind of all identified a need, that there was a gap. And for me, this gap had been apparent for quite some while. When I was as a delegate at the International Standards Organization, I saw how China was acting, right? And China has pillars too. China has 5 pillars to their national security strategy. And one of them is called setting the rules of the game. Setting the rules of the game is influencing international standards, frameworks, and norms. And their approach, it was very clear, was very, very harmonized, whole of nation, very deliberate. And it seemed that if I were looking at the Western nations, the Western delegations, that there was a lot of, how would I say, collaboration missing. A lot of we were all acting independently. And then once we realized what was happening, we started kind of pushing back and working together ad hoc. Now, obviously, as democracies,
can I dig down into that, because I agree and I see the same thing. I'm just not sure if I see what you're seeing clearly. Is it between the public and the private sector, or is it also that and between various public sectors, meaning various countries, federal and state organizations? What are you seeing? Like, where's the gap?
So it's at all of those levels. You have to understand that the governments were primarily focused on national security. And for some reason, areas like international standardization weren't identified as of importance for that. Like if you were looking at the ISO, what organizations were involved in that from the US? It was NIST. But if you're looking at national security organizations, most of the people that were there were only people that had a background in them. There was no direct participation. Now, UK, it was a little bit different. GCHQ was in there. And it was then literally people just identifying the need that we need to somehow counter the influence of these actors like China starting to collaborate independently with each other to do that, but no direction from anywhere or no help or assistance from anywhere at that point. It's very important. This is where we're now going back towards 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And exactly that gap exists in general when we're talking about public and private sector collaboration in cybersecurity. We do have ISACs, we do have ISAOs, we have the MEPs for the manufacturing sector, but there's so many of those organizations and they're all fragmented and they all seem to act a lot of times very independently rather than to be getting some kind of direct support or direction so they can emulate this whole of nation approach, so to say. And I think what we've now seen in the last few years is a shift towards in policy in the US where there's a lot more engagement. The State Department now is talking about cyber diplomacy, and this is also, I think, reflected in this national security strategy. Well, the same gap that I outlined was what we identified when we decided that there's a need for an ISAO. Because we looked at AI and the convergence of AI and cybersecurity, and we identified that there is no organization like this. And that immediately raises some alerts and questions. Because an ISAO is defined by presidential executive order, a NGO that's a community of interest that shares cyber threat related intelligence or information and best practices across that community and broadly. You would
Public,
imagine,
private, across it
Yeah.
breaks down the barriers, right, between all of the different actors acting with all good intention, but they're all going in different. They're all, the symphonies are playing from different music sheets all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So an
that's what we do.
ISO, how does it get implemented? Is it presented to Congress or is it presented to the executive body? How can you explain to us kind of how it gets implemented once you kind of come up with the strategy and you explain it?
Carlo, you want to take this? I know the part where we registered with the standards body for the ISAOs that exists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you register with the standards body for the ISAO. That's kind of the governing body, and then you go live, and so we did, and it's just incredible how well it's been received, not only within the United States, but also within the NATO community, and I think that really says a lot about the need for this type of organization and the need for this type of dialogue. Because as you were alluding to just a moment ago, David, there's there's absolutely a need for better partnering between private and public sector in the United States. And that's something that is ongoing, and I think is reinforced by yesterday's strategy announcement, but also at an international level, because of course cyberspace doesn't have borders, right? And that is the real point. We can't think of, in a sense, of a country anymore, in terms of its physical boundary. It's very
No, I
difficult.
mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when we look at, we're part of InfoGuard and we do security trainings all over the country. And when we do, we always talk about certain case studies. And one of them involve the fact that it is borderless, right? And when the cybercrime gang, the shadow brokers, brought down the telecom system in Spain, they made a proclamation like, we have no border or country. When you get online, you enter our world, we're in control now. And when we hear that, we have to understand the mind of the criminal threat actors. And by doing that, then we're able to better defend ourselves.
Exactly.
So what type of actions, like what can we see the ISO doing? Will there be meetings that can be held between various government leaders of various countries? Will there be a congressional hearing? What does it look like?
Okay, well, there's multiple things that are ongoing at the same time. We're standing up so-called working groups internally at this point, right? So there's, of course, the internal member meetings. There's the Executive Advisory Council that we have, that we're still looking for additional members for, that currently meets monthly, and it'll move into like a quarterly type of meeting session. Together with TBI, the Tutorial Breda Institute, we are holding events similar to podcasts, similar to mini conferences, right now virtual, about certain high topics. So we started a event series that was about AI impact, ethics, and bias. And this event series is now progressing into basically taking specialist communities and discussing what impact generative AI like ChatGPT or other forms of AI have on their specific job. So let's talk to offensive security people. Let's talk to CISOs. Let's talk to other job specialty groups and have them have a conversation about this.
Yep.
On the larger scale, I can just give an overview of the next few months. We have joined the Overseas Advisory Security Council, which is by the Diplomatic Security Service, and we are actually in the planning committee for the country of Latvia. By March 30th, roughly, we'll host are involved in a crisis management tabletop. And that might turn after that into a tabletop that will span 3 countries.
That's fantastic. I am
Yeah.
such a proponent of tabletop exercises because organizations are all well-intentioned, right? But they create policies and then nobody practices them. And at a very rudimentary, and not to simplify things too much, because I tend to do that, because I think there's a level of sophistication that comes with simplicity. But when you think about children in school, young children, right, they do fire drills, right? Otherwise, when there's a real fire, they're going to be running in the hallways, going all over the place and bumping into each other and not get to the exit. They're not going to know where it is. We create these policies and then we put them in a drawer or we leave them on a digital file and nobody looks at it until boom happens and there's a massive data breach. And everyone's like, are you calling the lawyers? Are you doing this? What do we do? Like nobody really knows the actual reality of what you're supposed to do. And that practicing of the fire drill is so important. And here, doing it internationally it's brilliant to me.
Yeah, and like Carlos said, we are being so well received overseas because
Excellent.
other countries are looking at the model of ISAOs and they love it. Just last year, we were together, Carl and I were attending a meeting that's called Riga Stratcom. It's by NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, which is in Riga, Latvia. And we had people come up to us all the time. Maybe, Carlo, you want to talk about some of the people that approached us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was astonished by how warm we were received. For example, the Swedish Defense Research Institute. And of course, that was really at the time when Sweden was looking to join NATO at the very, very beginning of the conflict with Russia. And they were saying, look, we have the same concerns, for instance, around critical infrastructure. How do we safeguard our critical infrastructure? Let's talk about civil defense. It's a top priority for us. What are your experiences? What are your best practices? We'll happily share ours because we'll be stronger together. And so, let's carry this on. And so, very, very warm reception by organizations such as that one in multiple countries. And so, therefore, I really think that there's a lot to be said. And this fits so perfectly, this yesterday's cybersecurity strategy is kind of written in a perfect alignment to this vision, right?
It really is. If you guys are open to it, why don't we kind of crack it open just a little bit? If you're okay doing that, I would love to just kind of, take a look at it. Obviously, we have the first couple. I've gone through this. I know you guys have. It's hot, literally hot off the presses, right? What we have is several different pillars. And Michael, you had mentioned that China has 5. Does anybody kind of want to walk us through some of these pillars? What I found is they were really, really interesting. I mean, the language used here was pretty powerful. I mean, it was pretty, we saw one of these in 2003. We've seen them since 2008, 2012. We've seen iterations of them. But this one seems to go it seems to be much more of a roadmap, in my opinion, than before. And it looks like there's legislation in movement that can actually make a lot of these ideas come to fruition. What are your thoughts? What's your initial take?
Well,
I think
I'll jump in very briefly. I think it's a very powerful document. I think it's a very clean document. It's obviously very well thought out, and it hits all the spots. Now, the first pillar I'd like to comment on because it's dear to my heart, the one of relating and regarding critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll pull
Um,
it up right here.
yeah.
Pillar
So
one, right? Yeah, right here,
critical
pillar one.
infrastructure
Yep.
is something that is it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable across the
Mhm.
world. Cybersecurity is still, let's say, in its infancy, relatively speaking, because at the end of the day, in fact, I was listening to a speech by General Nakasone just the other day, and he said, "Well, I would actually give 6 months ago, I would have given the U.S. critical infrastructure a C minus, and as a grade because there were just there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Oh
He did
yeah.
not comment as to what grade he would give right now, but I dare say that critical infrastructure is a lot bigger than people think at first. It's not just the big organizations. There's a whole supply chain. There's a whole massive pyramid beneath it, and that massive pyramid is generally nowhere near as secure as it ought to be in order to
Well,
guarantee
no,
clean.
we've discussed this in the past, right? Like when you think of critical infrastructure, that includes water, and that include. I mean, we're not talking the national, transportation and electric. We're talking about like local water companies. What do you think, listeners? Right, their cybersecurity policies and resilience is probably pretty weak in general, right?
Well, yes, because a lot of these organizations are also they don't have professional. We have a cybersecurity talent gap, which is something we'll talk about again.
Absolutely.
There's not enough skill really to go around and cover and fill all these holes. And so, when it comes to organizations that are perhaps state level or local council, municipality level, there are gaps. There isn't enough personnel, and there are policies are not properly implemented. Now, then there is the whole idea of where who should be liable and who should bear the burden and the cost
Right.
of cybersecurity development, and that's something that this cybersecurity strategy begins to address extremely well.
It does,
And
and that's really interesting. And I think that was that pillar. Oh no, pillar two was interesting. We can come back to pillar two, or why don't we address it since it's up on the screen? But then let's get to the liability, the shifting of the burden, because that's going to change things a lot.
Yeah.
With safe harbors being created, etc. But pillar two is pretty powerful, isn't it? It's saying the U.S. government and private sector in alliance with the U.S. government isn't going to just sit in the sidelines. It's going to be proactive with offensive security.
absolutely,
Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful. I mean, this entire concept of hunt forward that we're already right now seeing, where
Mm-hmm.
US cyber experts are deployed overseas in Eastern Europe, both contractors as well as US government individuals, to deal with the current, I'm going to call it global crisis that we find ourselves in. This is just a reflection of this. I
Right.
think
And, and,
overall,
and, and we
it's a
saw it
reflection.
recently in healthcare, right? When they took down Hive, I think it was the
Yeah.
Hive ransomware gang. That was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think this entire strategy is a reflection of the situation we find ourselves in.
Yep.
AI, it, AI has been there, but what is right now is different. Is it's being commoditized,
Right.
right?
It's being democratized, right? Like
Exactly.
everybody is starting, everybody from school children on up to teachers, on up to professionals, attorneys, physicians. A lot of people are engaged in it every day.
Yeah, which means we are collecting data, huge amounts, vast
Mm-hmm.
amounts, everywhere, way more than we've had before. Great opportunity, but this brings massive risk. And this means the things we have been talking about, specifically in an environment where we're dealing with cyber warfare, actually a land war in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
they now matter.
Right.
And I think this strategy is a reflection of that. Things matter now, and we have to fix the issues that we were all aware of for the last 5 years. And I
Yeah,
think this
absolutely.
is, I see the first steps in here.
Oh yeah, and there's been recent investigations that have done, like, if people think cybersecurity is just for the IT people involved, like it's coming to local criminal gangs. There was just an investigation I saw involving like just criminal gangs, like typical gangs like the Crips and the Bloods that normally would be dealing drugs or things like that. They're getting into account takeovers, credit card fraud, dark web things, and because the penalties aren't there, right? When they distribute things like fentanyl and somebody dies, they can be charged with murder and go away for life. If it's credit card fraud or things like that, it's 5 years in a federal penitentiary as opposed to this. So they're evaluating their own risk. It's a different time now than we've seen when these strategies have been issued in the past. So I think this one will be much different.
And furthermore, David, most of these criminal gangs are actually based outside in different legal jurisdictions where the United States hasn't really got the power to go and implement any solutions.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah,
that's
especially the ransomware gangs, Lockbit 3.0, all of those gangs, right?
Yeah, the like the info stealer things. Just it's incredible what's going on out there, and it's scary. So that's one of the things that maybe it's a bit too early to mention, but Michael and I have been investigating as part of what we want to offer members of the ISAO, the ability to actually do dark web assessments of their organization to be able to detect potential threats coming in from dark web early, preventatively. You see, so I think that's the idea of, again, they're dismantling and disrupting cyber criminals is kind of part of something that we are also interested in supporting in terms of the missions of the ISAO.
Absolutely. I mean, exposing more and more light on the dark web is really critical because as we understand the mind and the behavioral, analytics of the criminal organizations, then we can better defend ourselves.
Well, and right now it's really scary because I've actually seen outputs from dark web, as many of us have, I guess, in our profession. But it's incredible. You have, for some of the listeners that aren't aware, cyber criminals have a full scan of your machine, a full scan of every website you visited, and all the passwords are collected, and it's all offered up for sale on the dark web for like $20 to $30 each.
Absolutely. And oftentimes we don't even know, like, we could give our information to a trustworthy site, but we don't know that they sold the information to a third party. That company over there gets breached, and then now all of a sudden our data, unbeknownst to us, which gets back to regular hygiene, right? It gets back to fundamentals. It gets back to not using the same passwords on every single app, no matter how strong that password is.
You know what's particularly concerning to me is that now these cyber criminals are able to keep your session live as they sell you credentials. So you don't need to worry about there's the multi-factor authentication doesn't always protect you anymore, right?
No, we saw that with the recent Uber breach, right? The social engineering that occurred there, even though they had multi-factor authentication, it was just it was fatigue, right? They just kept bugging them until they clicked.
I think there's an interesting segue here, by the way, into AI as well, right? When we're talking about social engineering, and we're talking about these aspects of how to defeat multi-factor authentication, which came in the end down to the human, there's this concept of AI nudging. I'm not sure whether anyone here is familiar with this. AI nudging means I'm changing your environment that is surrounding you to manipulate you or influence you to take an action that is the action that I want to see. Nudging is used in information theory, marketing, or whatnot. But now we're using AI, right? And just imagine, again, all the information I can get about a person on the dark web. Combine it with something that has the abilities of generative AI like ChatGPT, maybe some of the technologies that we've seen for deepfakes, for voice and for video.
Yeah, we've seen that the FBI recently came out with an announcement last summer about deepfake being leveraged in hundreds of companies here in the U.S. For remote jobs. People were applying and they didn't even have to hack into the company. They were hiring them in the company and then stealing the data.
Yeah.
Interesting. So interesting.
I think AI will here create actually for us in this way. It's a threat mostly because it will significantly enhance and make social engineering and make it more scalable.
Oh yeah, it's like technology, to be simplistic again. It's like technology on steroids, right? Like one person can do 20 persons job, or the speed at which one person with a bad actor can act becomes exponentially faster.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. So let's go back to the U.S. National Cybersecurity Strategy here. Pillar 3: shape market forces and drive security and resilience. I think this is a really powerful pillar, right? Because they talk about shifting the burden on software manufacturers, product manufacturers, service providers, potentially away from individuals and small businesses, which I think in theory is a great idea, right? Create the one thing that confused me, and this is why I'm happy to ask you guys this. They were saying they're going to create new standards in which to apply, almost like a standard of negligence, right? Like if you're going to put a product out there, you can't be negligent. If you comply, we'll give you safe harbor, right? They can't have private causes of action against you. You can't be held liable, etc. But if you don't, right? It's like mandated insurance or mandated regulation, like HIPAA in healthcare. If you don't, there's going to be liability. I think that's great. Don't we already have those though? I mean, is it NIST? This seems like it was relying like a NIST-led framework, but are they going to enhance NIST? Do you think?
So I think with standards, right? We have a lot of standards. We have ISO 27000 is the series which I
Yeah.
worked on. NIST. We have the SOC reports. The problem is a standard without enforcement and oversight is a piece of paper, and we're seeing that.
Right.
With the
It's
current
just so
standards.
much parchment, right?
Exactly. And how many companies find a small audit company that will create such a narrow audit scope, right? Where basically the standard is just assessing a tiny component of the entire system. And in the end, you still get the same paper, the same passing grade. But is this reflective of actually the entire system that the product or services that you provide rely on? In this case, they're not. So it all depends on, is there oversight? And then is there enforcement for when things go wrong? Without those components, I don't think standards are necessarily a solution here. So I'm looking forward to seeing like then some enforcement of these standards, because coming from Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of companies act basically with almost unlimited risk appetite. Because from the engineering
Absolutely.
functions, we have the break things fast and fix them faster. Well, that's
Right.
great if you're not, Theranos selling medical diagnosis to people
Yeah.
or
We have several
providing critical
episodes on
services.
Theranos. We did a deep dive on Theranos, including having somebody attend the trial. Yeah, Theranos is just a story unto itself. But that's it's a great example, right? Of
Yep.
if that's the mindset, how are you going to implement this? How do you think? Just speculating here, we won't hold you to any of this. How do you think they will begin to enforce this? Like how like who do you think would be enforcing it? Do you think the SEC will get involved? Do we think the FTC will drive it? Will it be the FBI led, or
I
will it
think
be a new agency?
I don't know. That's a really difficult question. That's above my pay grade.
That's okay. That's why I asked you, because it was well above mine. I was just
Yeah,
curious.
yeah.
Like,
So I don't know. I mean, I've listened to Anne Neuberger, the NSA leader, recently speak about, um, in terms also of shifting the burden, right? She made an example. She said, well, typical users cannot always, we cannot expect them all to be cybersecurity capable. My grandmother couldn't do that, right?
Right.
She wouldn't, necessarily know how to handle her security on her devices, right? So that's part of it. The other thing that she mentioned was that, and this is about oversights of standards implementations, it would be a very good thing to have visibility on where everybody's at with regards to their cybersecurity posture. In the same way that
Yeah.
when you go to a restaurant, and this is Anne Neuberger's own words, when you go to a restaurant, you can see there's a label there
The
that
health
says
grade.
the
The
food
health
hygiene.
grade.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
food hygiene and health grade.
Exactly.
And
Because
it's
we
not
all kind of agreed there's a basic threshold that you need to make if you're going to hold yourself out to the public and cook for people, right?
Exactly. So I'm expecting a lot to come out along those lines, and
Agree.
I'm sure that it will be instigated by the Office of the Cybersecurity Director, but it will probably be done again in partnership with a number of organizations, including CISA and probably including a number of private sector actors and civil society actors, including potentially even organizations like ISAOs and ISACs.
Yeah.
So that's
I would
all
think
there
so
is to
too.
it.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to happen fast. I think it's going to happen fast because there's a, it's clearly a top priority. Um,
Yeah.
in relation to the critical infrastructure, I also wanted to mention that we've had a vision over the last couple of years, really, that we codenamed Cyber Eagle, which is around, let's say, and it really fits with this idea of shifting the burden, right? Because part of it is a financial burden. And I think that reading the strategy, listening to what the various commentators and White House officials had to say, there's going to be government funding going into this to make sure that cybersecurity postures improve and increase across the board. And now our vision was, and it still is, why don't we create a system whereby companies in critical infrastructure, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, are able to avail themselves of um, like a forgivable loan, a PPP type, as we've seen
To
during the COVID
bolster up their
pandemic, right?
standards and their compliance and their systems, their tools, their
To be able to,
practices.
yeah, to be able to afford
Yeah, whether it's by
improve
tax incentives or I mean, there's several different ways they could do it, right?
several different ways where that they could use to be able to afford it. But it ought to be done. It ought to be somehow, the orchestration of that ought to be done, by the government, and then implemented through agencies and different outreach organizations. And then and this program, I think, would go a long way in really helping to turn this vision into a reality. Because strategy, it's all about how you go about implementing it that makes a
Yeah.
difference. And
If
that's
if I'm
where we're concerned is, I just want to make sure that at least we on our side, as the ISAO, as the institute, do everything that we can to support the implementation of the strategy.
Absolutely. If I might extend on this, I think one thing that we mentioned before, right, is that the ISAO is very broad. The focus of ISAOs is very broad and expands beyond the critical infrastructure sector. Now, when you're starting to hold companies towards standards and you're starting to involve liability beyond what has previously been done, the immediate question is, are you empowering those companies to actually fix what they're having, the issues you're having? And of course, TTP loans or similar things fall into this group. The primary challenge, of course, and later on in one of our pillars that we find this, is the workforce, the gap that we have when it comes to cyber talent, and the fact that even a small company might sit on large amounts of data nowadays or be involved in important projects, but they don't have the funds to staff cybersecurity, and they certainly don't have the funds to employ a dedicated threat intel analyst or even a team. And that is where the ISAO is able to provide similar services or that to fill that gap, for example, for such companies. Because I've had these conversations, mostly in Europe so far, but even here we just recently started it, about this concept of civil cyber defense. And with that, I really mean it from an old school perspective where, I don't know, in the 1920s, 1930s, like people were worried about roads and all of this stuff, and society was involved in protecting that. And it was everybody's job, and everybody was supposed to have a part in it. In cyber, like we said, no, not everybody can be a cyber expert. But if we really want to protect society, we need to understand that we have a soft belly, a soft underbelly, and that the critical infrastructure programs can never be expanded to cover all of that. That's not scalable. So we have to be okay with some risk, but we'd have to harden this soft underbelly to a certain degree as well, because our societies become more and more connected, and we see that in supply chain attacks. Things start outside of the critical infrastructure sector and then move inside of it. And I think this is where ISAOs and public-private partnership can play an extremely valuable role in support of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the National Cybersecurity Strategy.
Absolutely. And I think also it's a case of cyber resilience, right? Largely, right? So, how, and this is something that, again, I'm sure that the ISAO will be able to really address in a big way, is helping member companies to develop the best, the right cyber resilience best practices. So, because you're right, people are going to get hits, and people always do, no matter how amazing your defenses are. It's largely, the play is largely about cyber resilience and making sure that when you are hit, it doesn't hurt. You know.
Yep.
And again, I don't know how the ISAO is going to go about doing that, but I'm sure there's going to be some really powerful best practices that will be available for members.
Yeah. Well, what I found really refreshing here was the shifting of the burden from small businesses, and that directly addresses what you guys were just talking about in terms of the skills gap, right? Because the small businesses don't really have the ability to, even if they want to, right? But they may not even have the awareness of what their needs are in terms of what is needed, because they might not be in a regulated industry, so they haven't had to in the past. But then they don't have the financial wherewithal or the skill set to be even to address some of these concerns.
Yeah, very valid. I mean, are we expecting that every 50-person shop starts hiring a CISO?
Right.
That's not
That's
real.
just,
That will never happen.
that's just not realistic. So, in relation to, for example, the cyber diplomacy efforts, right, and this willingness from the United States government to have an outreach to allies and improve cross-border, let's say, implementation. There's obviously a big opportunity there for U.S. companies also in terms of a commercial opportunity that I think there ought to be that roadmap, if you like, the commercial roadmap, is also important, right? And is that something that you think will also be part of what the ISAO will be providing to member companies?
Absolutely. So think about it this way, right? Our approach was a little bit different than you would traditionally see for an organization involved in the threat intel space on purpose. We do have the national security communication channels behind the scenes, right? Like the US has exchange with its allies, whether we're talking about FBI, NSA, there are communication channels that are there. What we don't have are those for the private partnerships primarily, or those that don't pertain to true national security hot topic issues. And so when I started, well, I mean, I've been involved with NATO before that, but when I started reaching out, I actually on purpose chose the American Chambers of Commerce. Because by doing that, we reached out to American companies that are working abroad, many of them not in critical infrastructure sector, and tied them into our protection umbrella. And B, we're establishing the commercial relationships as well, not only into the markets that exist. So let's say, for example, this case, the Baltics, which is a very, very strong technology market, very innovative at this point, very much growing. So there's opportunities, of course, to get resources there as well. But on the other hand, also the ability then, because of the reputation that we have and how much people come to us, that if they're solution providers, that these solutions can then be offered to our partners overseas as well.
Yeah.
Because they become aware, of course, through information exchange, through networking of these partners that work with us. Or if a technology provider, like you mentioned the dark web solution we're talking about, wants to talk to us about a more deeper partnership, they can become part of our direct offering. And with that, then reach the exposure not only in the US, but start getting exposure overseas as well. So definitely it's part of our strategy, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the idea of the timing of all of this, right? I mean, it just seems like AI gets kind of, commoditized. It becomes in the mainstream this fall, this winter, right? And now you have this very powerful document that really is a roadmap to next steps. It'll be really interesting to see the legislation that comes from this, and the efforts through the ISO in terms of getting the international community engaged with the U.S. Can I ask something? Because I'm sure listeners will have this question. You were talking about there's a great reception from Latvia, and there's involvement from Latvia. Can you explain why? Do you think, like, why that country versus others?
Okay,
I mean, I
so
have my thoughts, but
so it started it was part of my strategic formation process. So first off, you
Okay.
have NATO's Cyber Defense Center of Excellence sits in Tallinn, and NATO Stratcom, which is basically AI and information warfare, sits in Riga. Why is that? Well, the reason is that these countries are bearing the brunt of information warfare and of cyber warfare for years, since the
Right.
1990s, because of their relationship, their close proximity with Russia.
Right.
So if you want to talk about a place on the planet that is literally like the
front
hotbed,
lines,
the front
right?
lines,
They
this
are
is
they are
where it
the
is.
front lines of cyber warfare. That's what I was thinking. So
Yeah.
hearing it from you makes me think that I'm not totally out of the loop. So that's
No,
good.
you're not. And that's definitely why we picked them. And I think that is also why they are so interested in working with the US and why they are
Oh,
so
sure.
receptive of talking to us. I can give you an anecdote. 3 weeks before the renewed invasion of Ukraine, I was in the Lithuanian Senate at a forum, it's a Vilnius Defense Forum, and nobody knew me there. And we were talking, like people were presenting, and in the end, public-private partnership came up as a topic, and I requested to be allowed to speak. And once I announced who we were, the entire Senate went silent. And everybody just stared at me and was like, well, what are they doing here? Oh, wow. And then after that, everybody started coming up to us. And in those 2 years, we've built relationships up to the deputy prime minister level of certain countries in the Baltics, secretaries of defenses, like the secretary of foreign affairs. It's the U.S. carries an excellent reputation right now over there.
That's fantastic. So what is coming up? What's on the horizon for the ISO?
So, like I said, in March we will host we will be involved in a tabletop crisis management exercise. The next step there is a tabletop spanning 3 Baltic countries, and we will be attending 2 NATO conferences as well, Stratcom and SciCon, the Conference on Cyber Conflict, and we'll be reaching out to the we just recently had an ambassador change in Latvia, and we'll be reaching out to the host country governments as well as a new ambassador to establish better relationships there and to start really integrating the partnership as a communication and information channel back into the ISAO. That's internationally. We also have started reaching out to the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise. There are some research projects that we want to get involved in for a ransomware capability building model for countries to adopt. That's hosted by CISA, the US State Department, and some other actors. Domestically, we're starting to build relationships, specifically in the space related to AI ethics. We're building a partnership for communities of interest with migration background or with minority backgrounds. We're starting to reach out to members of Congress to establish deeper relationships there for the purpose of course, starting to influence policy and the regulatory process to a certain degree. We have submitted comments, for example, on NIST AI risk management framework as well. So there's a lot of reach out happening there, and we are in a membership drive. Right, we are open for business, and we are attracting members, and we are building out our threat intel platform. So those are our domestic priorities at this point. Carla, did I miss anything? I'm sure I did. There's
No,
so much.
that is just a great roadmap of next steps. That was really impressive. Yeah, and we'll have links to all of this in the show notes, so please check this out. Carla, do you want to speak before as we wrap up? Do you want to speak about the Silicon Valley think tank and the institute? And we'll have links to that in the show notes. We encourage our listeners to get involved. Right, to join the think tank, join some of these sessions. It's open. You will learn so much. I don't get to attend as many as I want. I wish you had them every week. I would attend. So they're really, really interesting. I'm always blown away by the people in the room. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, just the leaders from every aspect you can think of are there.
Yeah, I completely agree, David. I'm blown away by the quality of the people in the room. I just cannot believe it. It's just phenomenal how somehow we've been able to aggregate such great minds. I'm totally humbled by that. Every time that we have a gathering, I learn a lot from the members. And yeah, I would welcome anybody who's a listener to join our think tank. I think there's no cost to joining, or if there is, it's totally negligible. And so it's not we're a nonprofit, we're a California nonprofit, and it really is about gathering the best minds we can at every level. So it's not only leaders of industry and leaders in the political sphere. We're talking about also grassroots cybersecurity talent, everybody that shares an interest in cybersecurity, in AI, and in wanting to make the world a better place should absolutely join us and participate in the various activities that we have, ranging from the types of discussions that we've had today in this session to discussions that we have around the cybersecurity talent gap, around AI ethics and AI bias, around how AI is used in the recruitment process, to how AI could be used to create a better, stronger democracy in the various countries. The topics are far-reaching. We like to look well ahead. So, although many of the activities that we do really relate to the world as we see it today, a lot of our work is really futuristic and is looking at how we want to see the world in 30, 40, 50 years' time. And so we need everybody's neurons and brain cells to come and help us forge a better planet.
Absolutely. Yep. And we encourage everybody. We will have special promotions segments on joining the think tank as well. And we will have links in the show notes. Carlo and Michael, thank you so much. We hope that we can speak again soon. We really value your insight. Thank you for all that you do for our country, for the world, for the securing individuals. You know, when we get online, it's individuals, it's our families that we want to protect, and it's the organizations, brands that we serve at work. And just helping care about those, it matters so much. And thank you guys for all you do. I'm so glad you guys are taking the lead. Like, it's really, really makes us all feel great about it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for.
Hey, well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Our next episode starts right now.
Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free. And download the podcast episodes, available everywhere you get podcasts.
To support our show and get exclusive pre-release episodes and bonus content, please subscribe to Cybercrime Junkies Prime.
Link in the description and show notes. And thanks for being a cybercrime junkie.